Good morning, everyone. My name is Bill Schenkelberg, the Managing Director here at Red Sky Alliance. Today I'll be talking with David Hyde-Volpe, who is a security expert with the VIZUS Group. David recently shared a fascinating story regarding a change in technology being used by criminal hackers at all levels of the spectrum. And just before we dive into this, what I think is a really interesting story, if you've missed any of the previous Red Shorts and or their associated reports, you can find them at redskyalliance.org, which we've had, we house hundreds and hundreds of cybersecurity related reports. So good morning, David, and thanks again for taking the time to share your story of a new and emerging criminal hacking TTPs. We here at Red Sky Alliance are always interested in sharing emerging criminal tactics to better inform our colleagues and clients. First, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and a little bit about the VIZUS Group?
Sure. First of all, thanks, for inviting me, Bill, and thanks for putting this on. I think this is a great resource to the community, and I think this is one of our best weapons as, white hat security researchers is to share the information that we have. The attackers are really good about sharing information, and we need to be as well. My name is David Hyde-Volpe, as Bill said. I'm the CTO and co-founder of the VIZUS Group. We're a cybersecurity firm in Greenville, South Carolina. We specialize in pragmatic cybersecurity at a professional service level. So things like security assessments, pen tests, security architecture, those sorts of activities. My background is varied. I started in chemistry as a theoretical chemist, got into computational chemistry, high performance computing. From there, I moved into software development, started my first company doing software development, then moved from there into making candles. I did some candle production, helped a friend start a business, and it was great. And then from there, moved back into technology, got into cybersecurity, started doing blue team cybersecurity, ran some cybersecurity teams for a while. Then I moved back into the sort of consulting and started doing general high-level cybersecurity consulting, CXO work, and a lot of pen testing, especially on the application side. So application, AppSec, web app pen testing, those sorts of things. Yeah, that's my background.
So last week, when we talked about some other matters, you said you had this, interesting story, interesting case study, and I believe it started about a year ago with a Microsoft warning. So with that, why don't you take it from there and kind of tell us your story or your case study that you just recently completed?
Yeah, sure. So the technology itself isn't necessarily new. And the technology we're talking about today is a proxy, a transparent proxy, some people call it, and it's a reverse proxy, other people call it. And it sounds fancy, but all it is there's a server between your client machine, your PC, and the web server you're trying to get to, and all your traffic routes through it, man in the middle. It's a classic kind of attack. What's new is that the toolkits for deploying that man-in-the-middle server have become incredibly easy to use. And this has been developing sort of incrementally since about 2017. One of the most popular ones is Evil Nginx 2 now, but started as one. I think it started in 2017, or at least first described in 2017. And it's been developing incrementally since then, but it's now in the last about a year gotten to be incredibly simple to deploy. And so attackers at every level can now use it. And what it does is it allows an attacker to harvest your session credentials when you try to authenticate to a service. So that sounds like a bunch of technical mumbo jumbo, but what it really means at a high level is if you get phished, your MFA and your password and username, it's all not going to protect you. Like your MFA becomes useless at that point because what happens is you go to this man-in-the-middle website. It looks just like the website you're trying to go to. So you're trying to go to your Office 365. You're trying to log in to see your email. And what you instead get to, and there's a lot of ways they can deliver this, but somehow they get you to go to this site that they control instead. And what it looks like is exactly like your Outlook, just like it, because they literally go dynamically grab the content from the website you're trying to go to. And it could be Instagram, it could be Facebook, it could be Microsoft 365. That's a very, very, very common one, because obviously if they get into your M365, they get your Outlook, they get your email. It's a bad day, right? They present the actual content. You see the real content. And you go to log in and they proxy your username and password through, and you get your multi-factor push on your phone, or you get prompted to input your token or whatever method you have set up for multi-factor. You get that prompt like you normally would, and you enter it. And they again proxy that through to the real web server. And now you're signed in, and they actually proxy you through to the thing you thought you were going to. So you have no idea that you've just been phished. To you, everything's working fine. On the back end, the attackers now have, in most cases, at least 30 days of access to your systems, and they can extend that if they want to. Some systems, it's indefinite. If they do it through your phone, a lot of phone apps have indefinite cookies so that you don't have to constantly re-sign into your phone apps. So this has been evolving, like I said, incrementally since 2017. There was a warning by Microsoft about a year ago that this had reached sort of a critical level. But I think most people ignored it or didn't understand it, didn't know what to do with it. And probably part of the reason is there's no real solution, which is terrifying. The problem is that the tools don't exist on a commercial level to detect these sites, and they would have to live on your client machine to be of use. So, you go to a man-in-the-middle site, your users go to a man-in-the-middle site, and they don't have any clue. The technology to detect that is, it exists, but it's very technical and it's not been commercialized. So, people like me have access to that technology, but most people don't. But one thing I want anyone who's listening to this to take away is that the MFA does not protect you from this attack. So, Bill mentioned we had a case study, a situation that happened recently. We were called in to help a client, and the client had been compromised in Azure, and the attackers had used their Azure infrastructure to set up their criminal infrastructure. So all the virtual desktops that they would use to do what they were going to do. And what that was using the sessions that were hijacked from this man-in-the-middle website to log into the email accounts of, in the case that we were investigating, 150 different CEOs, CFOs, senior business executives that they had captured from a man-in-the-middle website, and then do high-level business fraud. And this group is very sophisticated on the business fraud side. And so, we took them down and saw what they were doing, but they were not super technically sophisticated, yet they could do all of these things because the toolkits are simple. I mean, in 5 minutes, press enter on a script, enter the IP address of your server, enter the domain you want your phishing server to be, enter the type of server you want to mimic, like is it GitHub, is it M365, is it Facebook, enter, and you're live. And it's that simple. And then you can deliver a link to that all sorts of different ways, through phishing emails or, compromised apps or malicious ads or just all kinds of methods. But one of the scary things, and one of the things I really wanted to come on and talk with Bill when he made the offer. I was very excited about it because I want to get out there to the community. It was scary when I did victim notifications. I was notifying victims that their accounts have been compromised. And when I would get a hold of IT professionals, I thought, at last, it's the IT professional, I'll be able to explain what happened and they'll understand. But the vast majority did not understand, and a simple majority thought what I was describing was impossible, that somehow their Microsoft security licensing would protect them, or that their email security would protect them, or that their MFA would protect them, or whatever they thought. They thought what I was describing was impossible. And so there's clearly a large gap for our IT professionals as well as our security professionals on the capability set of the attackers right now. And that's probably the scariest part, because if we don't know that they can do it, we are not looking for it. Yeah, I think that sums it up. Bill, do you have any questions?
Yeah. No, well, so you had mentioned last week when we talked that about 6 months ago they kind of pivoted from stealing to selling, and you mentioned that their business enterprise was pretty sophisticated. If you could talk about that.
There was a cybercrime group that about 6 months ago, somewhere in there, 6 months here or something, started to sell this as a service to make all of this even easier. So now you didn't even have to go, grab the code that's open source that you could use. That's a simple setup like I described. You literally could just sign in like you would if you were going to create an Outlook account in Microsoft 365, and all your stuff is set up for you, and you just pay for, a subscription service, and then the credits just start falling out. So yeah, you don't even have to be a script kiddie. You can just subscribe as an affiliate.
Did law enforcement get involved with this, and were they able to identify some of the bad guys here?
So we of course reached out to the FBI immediately, and were able to get in contact with them and give them all the information that we had, which was a good bit of information. But I think they're fairly constrained on the technical side right now as far as hands. And so this has been a couple weeks, and to date, as far as I know, they haven't engaged technically. So they have the ability to, but they have the access to the data, but I think they're constrained on the resource side.
Well, and you mentioned too that from what you've seen that this group is still up and running, right? They just kind of pivoted in there. Can you say what area of the world they're from without giving away any?
Yeah, no, I don't know. Their English was only somewhat broken. It evoked, maybe India, Pakistan area, but their sophistication with U.S. banking was extraordinarily high. I mean, they were navigating filings that would confuse most people, even if it was a legitimate request you were making of the bank. And so to do that in someone else's company illegitimately and not trip up the bank was impressive. So
wow.
I think they have someone on the U.S. side with U.S. banking experience involved. But it was a fairly large group. I don't know how big they were, because I don't know how much of their infrastructure we actually got. I think my gut tells me it was only a small part of their infrastructure, like one team, that they probably had multiple teams, because they would use a anonymous file sharing application to pass the credentials around that were harvested from the man-in-the-middle server. And so I could see in their web history as they would go and they would grab from this anonymous file sharing system. They used Telegram as their communication method. They used a browser plugin called, I think it's called Edit This Cookie. Then they would create sessions for each of the users they'd compromised, and they would save those sessions to the desktop. And then they'd have text files. They use Notepad++ to create notes to communicate on each of the cases. And then in their downloads folder, they would just download they would just leave it in the download folder. They would download all the documents they would find while they were kind of combing through the emails. These guys were very slow. They didn't get in there and spam all the contexts or anything like that. They were very deliberate, looking for banking filings specifically, and then trying to, they did things like add a corporate officer. Fascinating. So they would steal the identity of some person who was a business executive of some kind, and they would have his driver's license picture and passport picture, which they would have scraped from his email, because he would have sent that to some bank or something. I hate when banks ask for that stuff for that very reason. And then they would take that person's identity and they would add him as a corporate officer to another company. And then they would use that identity to do all of their fraudulent requests through, like, initiate a wire transfer, take out a loan, all sorts of stuff. Very sophisticated. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly what part of the world. They had pretty good OPSEC. They're using Tor. And then another fascinating little thing is they would use VPNs to log into the precise region of the country that the victim was located in. So when the victim first went to the man in the middle website, they would log the IP and the region, like Alabama, US. They would VPN to Alabama and then log in for future sessions. Log in. They're already logged in. They're just using the session to authenticate.
So if someone used this this service, this sounds like it wouldn't be at a script kiddie level. I mean, it sounded like the business side of this, they were pretty sophisticated. Yeah.
Yeah. So on the technical side, they could certainly be script kiddie level or even below. And on the business side, they had to be very sophisticated for what they were doing. But there are all sorts of scams you could run with this that wouldn't require sophistication. You could do credential harvesting as a service where you just get into someone's mailbox and spam all their contacts with phishing links to the site, collect a whole bunch of cookies from random people and sell those to other people. So you could run a credential harvesting scheme. You could run a malicious ad scheme where you just literally send people ads through this. You could run any number of gift card schemes. There's all sorts of things you could do. This group just happened to have some high sophistication in business banking fraud.
So you're painting for me anyway, kind of a scary picture of what could happen if you're phished in this circumstance. So why don't you tell us what can you do if you do get phished? Are there any mitigation strategies or anything that you could do to save yourself at that point?
This is the scary part, and this is partly why I think people aren't talking about this as much. When you don't have a good solution, you don't tend to scream about it. There isn't a great solution right now. There are some things that you can do. People talk about security being layers. The layers is your best approach right now, and those layers are training, right? So users need to be trained and reinforced and patted on the back when they do it right, and retrained when they do it wrong. To not click on stupid things. Don't click on ads on websites. Don't go to weird websites. Don't click on silly emails that don't make sense, et cetera, right? There's the training. There's the training to look at the URL. So one of the things that this man-in-the-middle phishing, transparent proxy stuff can't fool is TLS. That's the encryption between you and your website. But what they do is they create a valid TLS session between you and their man-in-the-middle site. So the link won't be right. There are lots of ways that they go about putting you at ease, despite the link not being what you might expect it to be, sort of psychological manipulations. But oftentimes people are just too busy. When that Microsoft screen pops up and tells you to log in because you're doing single sign-on to some site, do you always check the URL in detail? Maybe, but a lot of people do not. And so that's one thing, training people to really double check that URL. But even then, they do sophisticated substitutions like a Cyrillic A, the little A-looking character instead of the A. And so most people can't notice that even if they do look. So it's tricky. But so user training is one that can cut some of it down. Looking for indicators of compromise. So IP filter, IP blacklists, URL blacklists. This particular cyber crime group that I saw didn't rotate the URL that often. They rotated the IP frequently. Maybe because they're lazy about, they probably have all these lures out there in the water. And if they were to change their redirect URL, their main one, all those lures would break. And so they are hesitant to change that one. They can certainly change it, but in my experience, they didn't. They changed their IP address much more frequently. So URL filtering, IP filtering can help a little bit. The last research study I saw on this particular man-in-the-middle problem found that the IP filtering and URL filtering caught about 40% of what was out in the wild. 40% is better than 0%, but it's not incredible. From a technical control standpoint, once you go to the phishing site, once your user goes to the phishing site and they don't recognize it as a phish, you're in a bad spot. There are a few things that can sort of kind of help at this point. So take, for instance, Google's approach with the emailed second factor code. It will say, this is your IP, this is your location, this is the type of computer. And that would show the man-in-the-middle proxy server's information and not your own. A sophisticated user will notice that if they know proxy attack is a thing, like possible. If they don't, they may just think it's a weird quirk and say, no, it's certainly me trying to log in, because you literally just tried to log in. So most users would say, yes, of course it's me, because it gets that is this you thing. They say, yes, it's me. I just tried to log in. I know I did. If you know that this proxy attack is a thing, you may now notice that the information it's displaying doesn't match your system and your location, and you may be aware that there's a proxy attack in play. So that's something, but very few users are going to notice that. So that doesn't help very much. And then finally, one last step where maybe technical control could help is on the, if you're using M365, in this case, these attackers were only targeting those folks. Conditional access is a thing in M365, which could help. Conditional access allows you to force reauthentication for user based on changes in access patterns and other things. So in theory, when that server, when they take your cookie later and use it to access, if it's different enough, Microsoft might flag it as a risky sign-in and force them to reauthenticate, which would break the session and they would lose access. But they're clever enough to use a VPN to authenticate from your state. Microsoft can't do very much to help you there. So the technical controls are pretty weak. There is technology to detect these sites, but only used by security researchers. It's not been baked into any kind of product as far as I know. And so that isn't a help to most people. So it's a big blind spot right now. It's why the attackers are using it. And they've been forced in this direction, of course, because people have rolled out multi-factor. So multi-factor is still helpful against a myriad of other attacks. And so because of that, attackers are now using this almost exclusively, and it's paying huge dividends for them.
So about 5 years ago, I was at a conference where a techie from a pretty large company made the comment, if we could only eliminate the humans, we would be okay. So I guess not getting phished at the beginning of this in this subject matter is kind of the key to safety, cyber safety, right?
Yeah, and I hate recommending that because I live in the real world, right?
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
we have business to do. We're pressed for time. We're trying to do our best. We're getting bombarded with emails and requests. Our users are, and they're clicking stuff because they're trying to get their job done, right? So but it is the single best thing you can do. To security practitioners out there, if you're responsible on a blue team side of things, invest everything you can in user training and reinforcement and education. That is by far the single biggest bang for your buck you can get, period, end of story. 90% of all compromises, it's a stat, right? Stats are all over the place, but it's something really high of compromises start with phish, and it's not that expensive.
It's a
time,
human element, right?
Focus, but focus on your people.
David, thanks for sharing this kind of sobering case study and your cautionary warnings thereof. Interesting topic, and I think it will be valuable to everyone listening here today. So, and it was a pleasure hearing about these new, what I call criminal techniques, to make our networks safer, hopefully. If you'd like to ask any questions of David, you could do that through me. My email is up on the screen, or with Jim McKee. And have a nice day to everyone, and we'll see you all next week on the 28th.